this is just a way of capturing the work that I did, first of all experimenting with the consistency of inks and different types of inks. So this one was using acrylics applied with a palette knife, and I was out in the garden, did loads of experimenting, and I just need to quickly capture these to show sort of what's in my sketchbook, as it were, because they're too big and bulky to go in. I used ghost prints as well. I spilt coffee there. Effective ghost prints, and I really liked what was going on here with the way that the paint feathers when you pick it up. Experimenting with lines, and again different types of dilutant. Here the colours were running into each other, and you get some really interesting effects around here and sort of puddling. It was a boiling hot day and the glass was drying really quickly, it was absorbing the heat. Again, this one sort of running out to the edges, so putting plenty of water on and taking prints off. I tried charcoaling onto the plate and it didn't work at all, but this one was, having made a print, using charcoal on top just to see what I could get with that. Odd splodges and flicks, so a lot of insignificant things. This was putting just on a big blob of acrylic and smearing it around by hand, but again, as you pull it off you get all these lines and sort of leaf effects. And then with the different, taking ghost prints, less ink, but the effects of the pulling the ink increased as you went through. That's almost, looking at it down through the iPad now, it looks like a sort of a landscape with lots of shadows. That was the playing with acrylics. Then I also worked, this was brown printing ink, but first of all being spread out with a brush, just dry onto a glass plate, and then mixing it up with hand washing soap, which is what I use to clean my plates, but it just dilutes the printing ink down really nicely and makes it very workable, so you get this nice bubbly effect where the print's been pulled off. This one I quite liked because this was one where the blue soap hadn't been mixed in quite thoroughly, and it actually started to take on a colour of its own and to become part of the print. It looks to me like rocks and cliffs. That's a technique I could use in a representational print. And again, what I also tried was doing some back drawing onto these plates as well. So, and again, this was, I worked into it when it was really thin. I just worked onto the plate with a yellow soluble crayon, and the ink took up the yellow, but itself it dissolved into all these little granules. So that's quite interesting. Again, some of the effects there and how you could use them in representational work. So just to give it a bit of scale with my hand, it's not huge, but in the fine detail you get all sorts of shapes and stuff going on. Again, some really nice textures going on when you look at that in close up. So a bit scrappy, but interesting to see what it could do. This was working with two colours of printing ink, and again just looking at taking off ghost prints, consistency. I'm starting to try and mix them, but here. This is where I was running the colours, so I can't dilute them with. Yes, that's right. I've got a bottle to spray them with water. So the ink needs a bit of soap with it to make it start to move, and then you can add water and after that I then started tipping this print one way and then the other, and managed to get some really good sort of a network of runs across the plate. When it came to it, it hasn't printed them in that exciting a way. They look better on the plate. So I think this is probably just not very good paper. But if I had something that was a bit heavier and more absorbent, that would have made a really interesting effect. And again, just drawing quickly into what was on the plate and taking prints off there. It was at this point, what I was doing was hanging my prints on the line to dry, and so it was very, very hot day and very blowy, and I suddenly realised at this point that as the prints were blowing in the wind, they were getting ink all over my washing line, so that needed a good wash down afterwards. So another lesson learned. That's working with really wet ink, and again there. That was all. So they were all. They were printing ink again. This was working with some brown drawing ink, and again just splodging it onto the plate and taking prints off to see what I could get. That actually came through more interesting on the back. It started to sort of seep the colours out of the ink, and I liked the ghost prints better. Again, once they'd been used once, they started to take a better print. Which was so the subsequent prints were more interesting than the first one. Off we go again. It just suddenly stopped recording and told me that there was no more space, so I've just had to break off and spend some time working out the difference between my camera roll and my photos, and what can be well, how to delete and what can be deleted. So hopefully now we can carry on recording. This was the brown ink again, but what I used was something, a piece of paper that I'd got left over from my landscape prints, where I'd got some tissue paper glued onto it. So that gives me another option for creating colours in the background of abstracts. That one. Then this was working with working with water-based oils, which I love painting with, and I'll put up a picture of a landscape that I did using water-based oils, and I didn't use any water. I just had a spray bottle with some water in, and I sprayed straight onto the canvas and then worked the water-based oils straight into it, and for a while I had a huge swimmy mess. In fact, I better stop recording and go and show you the picture. Yeah, this was the picture that I did. It's quite a large oil painting done using water-based oils. I used no water with my paints in a palette. I just put them straight onto the canvas and used a spray bottle with water in it on the canvas. And at one point I just had this huge swimmy mess. I was working horizontally. I had the canvas flat on the grass in the field, and I was kneeling down in front of the canvas, and I really lost it at one point. It was just all floating around, but by applying paint and keeping working into it, I managed to put it back. I was in a frame of mind where I just needed to get out and get some fresh air and just do something big and drastic, and this landscape where they were clearing ditches and everything had been scrawled back and was scratched and uprooted, and a bit bleak. And it was November, it was grey, it was cold, but just all the sawn branches were there and the sawn trunks, and every time a tree had been sawn and exposed, it was bright orange. Just really suited my mood, and the whole thing came together. That was a really good experiment that day. Yeah. So meanwhile, back at the water-based oils, So yeah, I love painting with them, and interesting to see what they can do with printmaking. So this was just scraping them onto the plate and taking some prints off from Ghost Prints. That's the top one. Yeah. It's quite interesting. Again, it started to crackle and make some interesting ridges. This one was really starting to separate out there. And so it was a very hot day. The plate was drying quickly. And then when I just sprayed it with some water, it just started to split and was just so lovely. And the colours are really strong and pure, good clean colours, but with these interesting streaks and grains in them. So that started to get quite exciting. And again, thinning it down even more, and then it started to run. This was putting it on with a palette knife, just sort of working through into it. Again, it started to get almost like a bark-like texture, and it just ran into ridges. That probably helped. It was probably something to do with the paper as well, actually, sort of shriveling up and not coping well with the wet. So yeah, you started to separate the colours out, but you definitely got places where there was ink and places where there were runs. And then, I've just put, having got that one going, I've put a different colour over the top, just wiped it on with a palette knife and pulled the print off. And the colours did start to mix a little. You get this sort of darker denim blue, but on the whole, they stayed fairly separate, and they kept their layers one on top of the other. And the place there where it's the colours have mixed, but they didn't do it readily. They didn't run into each other when they were dry. So that was quite good separation. And then that's the Ghost Print off there. Yeah, just getting really thin by then. The plate was dry. Just going through it with a damp brush. Starting again with the big wet area. And again, putting the second print off, always more interesting than the first. This was where there were two very wet patches of colour. And then I started flicking with the brush, so flicking blue and flicking the yellow, and so they were wet enough to start mixing and running into each other. But again, I love this effect where you get sort of layers within the colour, dark and light streaks. And this area around the top, there's been some blue run into there, so it's starting to pick up the colour. And the actual texture of the print is quite sort of grainy and sandy. It's almost rough, yeah. Damp running Ghost Print. So quite interesting to see what I could get with those. And then very, very wet. And this one I'd very wet, and I think previous one that was just continually keep spraying into it, and spraying meant that there was some pressure behind the water that was being applied, so it sort of pushed the paint out. And then this one I'd sprinkled with some bicarbonate of soda, just to see what effect that had, and again it picked up some grains into the texture of the print. So overall with those, I had a very enjoyable morning out in the garden with all of that, and found some interesting effects. But on the whole, apart from the water-based oils and the soap into the Calico inks, I was a bit disappointed with what came out. It just seemed small, insignificant, very muted colours, and I didn't feel that I'd got much impact in the effects I produced. So the next session that I did, I wanted to try and amend that, and I was also working towards not what am I trying to say? No, lost it. Hold on. Yeah. Yeah. So no, I need to look at my sketchbook to see what I did. I also did these. This was working with the water-based oils, but I started to put the Caligo printing inks on top just to see what I could get. And after the best part of a week, the Caligo ink still isn't dry, and it has a bit of a sort of well, it's got looks like an oily residue, but they're supposed to be water-based inks, so I'm not quite sure what that is. But I thought the way the colours sat on top of each other, and the way you could get a really fine line with the ink, I just drew through it on top of the water-based oil, and the colours they have mixed and made a green, but the yellows sat on top quite nicely, made distinction. So that was the first print off there, and then I had a ghost print and a second ghost, and then this was on again the final ghost print, but it was on much better quality paper, and which was really wet, and that's made a sort of yeah, lovely soft blotting paper effect. It's yeah, picked up almost like a sort of skin texture, like an old person's skin with lots of wrinkles and grooves in it, but very soft. And some interesting effects sort of around the edges to play with. So yeah, that was also a success, mixing those two colours together.